You walked into a cafe this morning. Maybe it was yesterday. Maybe it was last Saturday. Doesn't matter. You ordered a flat white, the same flat white you've been ordering for years, and you tapped your card without looking. Then you looked. $6. $6 for steamed milk and a shot of coffee. And somewhere in the back of your head, a voice said, that used to be $3.50. Maybe $2.50 if you go back far enough. And you didn't say anything? Because what are you going to say? You just tapped and walked out. But here's the thing. It's not the coffee. You know that. It's the groceries. It's the petrol. It's the electricity bill that arrived last month with a number on it that made you blink. It's the rent. It's the mortgage. It's the everything. Your whole life got more expensive, slowly, then all at once, and nobody sent you a memo explaining why. And here's where it gets strange. You probably got a pay rise this year. Maybe 3%, maybe 4%. Your employer said, well done, here's a bump. And for a moment, you felt like things were moving in the right direction, but they weren't. Because while your pay went up by 3%, the cost of everything around you went up by more. You earned more money and ended up with less. Not because you made bad choices, not because you overspent, because the ground moved under your feet while you were standing still. That's not a metaphor. That's inflation. And if nobody ever sat you down and explained how this machine actually works, that's not your fault. You were never taught it. Not in school, not at uni, not at your first job. You were just expected to figure it out by watching your receipts get worse. So here's what we're going to do. In about 18 minutes, I'm going to take this thing apart. Not with jargon, not with graphs, just the way it actually works, who it hurts, who it doesn't, and why the system that's supposed to fix it might be making it worse for the people who can least afford it. 2 questions. That's what this whole video comes down to. If everyone is earning more money than they were 5 years ago, why can that money buy less than it used to? That's the first one. And the second one is the one that really stings. If the Reserve Bank of Australia's entire job, its one reason for existing, is to keep prices stable, then why does the thing they do to fight inflation make your rent go up and your mortgage repayment go up and your borrowing power go down? How can the cure feel exactly like the disease? Those 2 questions sound like they're about economics. They're not. They're about your life. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to answer both of them. Let's start with why everything costs more. Picture Priya. She's 29, works as a registered nurse at a public hospital in Western Sydney. Good job, stable. She's been there 4 years. In March this year, her pay went up by 3.5%. It came through on her payslip, and she felt good about it. She texted her mum. That Saturday, she drove to Woolies to do her weekly shop. Same trolley, same stuff. Chicken, rice, milk, eggs, bread, a bag of frozen veggies, dishwashing liquid, and a tin of tuna. She scanned it all through the self-checkout, and the screen said $187. 3 months earlier, the same shop was about $145. She stared at the number. She didn't buy anything extra. She didn't go fancy. The same trolley, the same food, $42 more. And just like that, her 3.5% raise started to feel like a rounding error. That's inflation in one scene. Not a textbook definition. Not a graph going up and to the right. Priya earned more and could afford less. That's the treadmill. You're running harder than you were last year. Your legs are burning, and you look down and the belt is moving faster than your feet. You haven't gone anywhere. Now, the official number for this is something called the CPI, which stands for Consumer Price Index. All it really means is that the Australian Bureau of Statistics tracks the price of a big basket of stuff: food, housing, transport, health, education, insurance, clothes, about 90 different categories, and every month they work out how much that basket costs compared to last year. In April 2026, that number was 4.2%. That means, on average, things cost 4.2% more than they did 12 months ago. Sounds manageable, right? 4%? Here's the problem. 4% is an average. And averages lie. If you're a homeowner in Adelaide with a paid-off mortgage, your personal inflation might be 2%. You barely notice. But if you're renting in Sydney, where housing costs went up 6.3% and you drive to work, where transport went up 6.6%, and your electricity bill just jumped because the government rebates ended, your personal inflation isn't 4%. It's 8, maybe 10. The number on the news doesn't describe your life. It describes a statistical person who doesn't exist. I'll be honest. It took me an embarrassingly long time to understand that the CPI doesn't measure what I spend. It measures what an average household spends. And I am not an average household. Neither are you. Nobody is. That's the first thing that clicks. Now let's meet Tom. He's 34, a sparky in Perth. Runs his own small operation, just him and an apprentice. Tom used to charge $80 an hour. He now charges $90. His customers grumble. Some of them say, "Mate, you're getting expensive," and Tom doesn't argue because he knows what they don't. His mortgage repayment went up $230 a month after the Reserve Bank raised rates in May. His ute costs more to fill because petrol is sitting around $2 a litre. His supply costs, cable, switchboards, the stuff he buys from the wholesaler, all up 15–20%. The $90 an hour isn't profit. It's survival. And here's the thing nobody talks about. Tom's customers are doing the same thing. The builder charges the developer more. The developer charges the buyer more. The buyer needs a bigger mortgage. The bigger mortgage means higher repayments. And higher repayments mean the nurse, the teacher, the barista. They all need more money too, so they ask for raises. And the cycle starts again. That's the engine. Inflation isn't one price going up. It's every price pushing every other price, in a loop, faster than anyone can catch. It's like a whole suburb of dogs chasing each other's tails. Nobody started it. Nobody can stop it alone. And yet somehow it keeps accelerating. Wait, stop. If it keeps accelerating, who's supposed to slow it down? That's where the Reserve Bank comes in. The RBA has one main lever, one tool it can pull, and it's called the cash rate. Right now, that rate is 4.35%. They've raised it 3 times this year alone. And the theory behind it is actually elegant. When the RBA raises the cash rate, borrowing becomes more expensive across the entire economy. Banks pass the increase to home loans, business loans, personal loans, credit cards. When borrowing costs more, people borrow less. When people borrow less, they spend less. When they spend less, businesses can't raise prices as easily because there are fewer buyers. Demand cools, prices stabilize, inflation comes down. In theory, it's beautiful. Like pulling one thread and watching the whole knot unravel. In practice, it's brutal. Meet Josh. 31, lives in Melbourne, has been saving for a house deposit for 3 years. He works in project management, earns a decent salary, lives in a share house in Footscray to keep costs down, and every payday he moves as much as he can into a savings account. By early 2026, he'd saved $80,000. 3 years of discipline, 3 years of saying no to trips, no to dinners, no to the car he wanted. And then the RBA raised rates, then raised them again, then again. 3 hikes in 5 months. Each time, 2 things happened. First, his mortgage borrowing power shrank because banks stress test at higher rates. The amount he could borrow dropped by about $60,000. Second, the deposit threshold didn't drop. If anything, prices in the outer suburbs held firm because existing owners with low fixed rates weren't selling. Josh saved for 3 years, hit his target, and discovered the target had moved. That's not a market correction. That's a gut punch. And Josh isn't alone. The Reserve Bank's own data shows that the average borrower on a variable rate home loan of $600,000 is now paying roughly $2,600 more per year than they were before the 2026 hikes began. That's real money. That's holidays. That's the emergency fund. That's the gap between getting by and going under. The RBA raised rates to cool the economy, and the people who cooled first were the people who were already cold. I'm going to be honest. The first time someone explained the transmission mechanism to me, I thought they were joking. You raise one interest rate that most people have never heard of, and somehow it changes the price of bread in Woolies 18 months later? It sounded absurd, but it works. Slowly, painfully, and very unevenly. That's the key word. Unevenly. There's a whole rabbit hole about imported inflation versus domestic inflation that I'm not dragging you into today. What matters here is understanding that not all inflation comes from people spending too much. Some of it comes from outside. Oil prices spike because of a conflict in the Middle East. Shipping costs rise. Fuel goes up. Everything that moves by truck, which is basically everything, costs more. That's supply-side inflation. The price isn't rising because Australians are spending recklessly. It's rising because it costs more to get things here. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The RBA's cash rate is a demand-side tool. It cools spending, but it can't make oil cheaper. It can't end a war. It can't shorten a shipping route. So when the RBA raises rates to fight supply-driven inflation, it's like turning down the thermostat in a house where only some rooms have heating. The living room cools down, but the bedroom, where the people who can least afford it are sleeping, freezes. Stay with me. This next part is where it actually clicks. If you're still here, you already understand more about inflation than most Australians ever will. So let me show you the part that changed how I think about all of this. Meet May. She's 22, a barista at a specialty cafe in Fortitude Valley, Brisbane. She makes flat whites all day, beautiful ones. Latte art, the whole thing. The owner of the cafe, Dave, raised the price of a flat white from $4.50 to $6 in January. Customers complain. Not to Dave, to May. She cops it behind the counter 8 times a day. What the customers don't see is what's happening behind the wall. The cost of milk went up. The cost of coffee beans, which Australia imports almost entirely, went up because the Australian dollar weakened against the greenback. The rent on the shop went up because the landlord's mortgage went up. Dave is now paying 11.5% super guarantee on every employee. The electricity bill to run the espresso machine, the dishwasher, the lights, up 25% since the government rebates ended. Dave didn't raise prices because he's greedy. He raised prices because if he didn't, he'd close. And May? May earns the minimum wage, $23 and change an hour. She makes the $6 coffee. She can't afford to buy it. That is inflation in a single image. And this is the part that still blows my mind. When the RBA raises rates to fight inflation, who does it hit? It hits May's customers, who now have less disposable income. Some of them stop coming. Revenue drops. Dave cuts May's shifts. May earns less. But her rent doesn't drop. Her groceries don't drop. The petrol to get to work doesn't drop. The cure didn't heal her. The cure made her sicker. Now think about someone else. Someone who owns 3 investment properties, bought years ago on low fixed rates since refinanced. Their property values have held. Their rental income has gone up because rents went up. Their shares pay franked dividends. Their super fund is doing fine because it's diversified. Inflation is an inconvenience for them, not a crisis. And the rate hikes? They barely move the needle because their debt is small relative to their assets. That's the revelation. Inflation doesn't hurt everyone equally. And neither does the cure. The cash rate is a single lever applied to an entire economy. But the economy isn't a single thing. It's millions of people in completely different situations. Priya the nurse, Tom the tradie, Josh the first home buyer, May the barista. Same inflation number on the news. 4 entirely different realities. The system measures inflation as one number, fights it with one tool, and pretends the impact is one size. It isn't. It never was. Inflation is a redistribution machine. It moves purchasing power from people who depend on wages to people who hold assets. And the interest rate lever amplifies that transfer, because asset holders can absorb the hit, and wage earners can't. Your payslip is a photograph, a single frozen number. Your cost of living is a video. It moves every day, every week, every time you tap your card. If you only look at the photograph, you think you're fine. You're not. The structure of how Australia measures and responds to inflation is, honestly, one of the most intellectually rigorous systems any country has built. The ABS does extraordinary work. The RBA's frameworks are globally respected. But the gap between how the system works and how it's explained to the public is genuinely embarrassing. Those two things shouldn't coexist. But they do. So let me clear up 3 things that almost everyone gets wrong. First, inflation is not the government printing money. I hear that all the time, and in Australia right now it's mostly wrong. The current wave is driven by energy prices linked to the Middle East conflict, the end of government electricity subsidies, and global supply chains that still haven't fully recovered. The Reserve Bank isn't running a printing press. This is cost-push inflation meeting a tight labor market. Different animal, different cause. Second, if your raise matched inflation, you're not fine. The CPI is a national average. If you live in Sydney and rent, your housing inflation alone is above 6%. If you drive to work, your transport costs are up nearly 7%. A 4% raise doesn't cover a 6% rent increase, plus a 7% fuel increase, plus a 25% electricity jump. Your personal inflation might be double the headline number. Matching the CPI doesn't mean matching your life. Third, the RBA can just fix this by raising rates enough. No, it can't. Not cleanly. Interest rates fight demand-side inflation. But a large chunk of what's hitting Australians right now is supply-side. You can't make petrol cheaper by making mortgages more expensive. All you do is add mortgage pain on top of petrol pain. The RBA knows this. They've said as much. But the cash rate is the tool they have, so it's the tool they use. Fighting inflation with interest rates alone is like fighting a fire by cutting off the water to the whole street. It works. The fire goes out, but the houses that weren't burning also go dry. Now, here's what you can actually do with this. First, figure out your personal inflation rate. The RBA has a free inflation calculator on its website. But more importantly, look at your own bank statements. Compare what you spent last June to what you spent this June on the same things. Rent, groceries, fuel, insurance. Your number won't be 4.2%. It'll be higher or lower, and knowing which one changes what you do next. Second, if you have a variable rate home loan and you haven't renegotiated in the last 12 months, call your lender or call a broker. After 3 rate hikes in 2026, there's a meaningful gap between what you're paying and what a new customer would pay for the same product. That gap could be worth thousands of dollars a year, for no effort beyond a phone call. Third, understand the difference between your nominal pay and your real pay. Nominal is the number on your payslip. Real is what that number can actually buy. If your pay went up 3% and inflation is running at 4.2%, your real pay fell by 1.2%. You took a pay cut. Your employer just didn't call it one. Knowing that changes how you negotiate. Every situation is different. What you've just learned is the framework, not the answer for your specific circumstances. If you want to go deeper on this, the ABS website publishes the full CPI breakdown every month. You can see exactly which categories moved and by how much. The RBA website has an inflation calculator, and their statement on monetary policy explains their forecasts in plain English. And if you want a solid Australian-specific book on getting your finances sorted, The Barefoot Investor remains a good starting point. Not because it covers inflation in depth, but because it builds the foundation that makes everything else easier to understand. We're at the end. Let me land this. 3 things to carry out of here. 1. Inflation isn't prices going up, it's your money going down. The distinction matters because it changes where you look and what you do. 2. The CPI is a useful national measure and a terrible personal one. Your inflation depends on where you live, whether you rent or own, and what you consume. Two Australians earning the same salary can have completely different inflation realities. 3. The system fights inflation with a single tool that doesn't land equally. Interest rate hikes cool the economy by making borrowing more expensive. But the cost of that cooling falls hardest on the people already under the most pressure. Inflation isn't a weather event that hits everyone the same way. It's a machine that redistributes purchasing power, and now you can see the machine. Here's the thing about that flat white. It didn't go from $2.50 to $6 because the world got greedier. It went from $2.50 to $6 because milk costs more, beans cost more, rent costs more, wages cost more, energy costs more, and super costs more. Every ingredient in that cup absorbed years of compounding pressure from a system that most people interact with every day and understand almost never. $6 isn't the price of a coffee. It's the price of not knowing how any of this works. Most Australians will feel inflation every single week for years without ever understanding the machine behind it. If you now see the machine, you've already changed what you can do about it. And if this video made someone check their bank statements, renegotiate their home loan, or understand that a 3% raise in a 4% inflation world is a pay cut, that's the whole point. This is general education, not personal financial advice. If you need advice tailored to your situation, speak to a licensed financial advisor.